Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. We're very excited to be presenting at this year's Tableau conference. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce ourselves. My name is Lisa Evans, and I am the Director of Operations and Prospect Management at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. I have over 25 years in nonprofit and development experience, and all of them have involved fundraising and database operations. My speaking partner today is Russ Phillips, who is the Director of Financial Systems and Data Analytics, also at the museum. Russ has over 20 years in nonprofit operations. We've spent many years together collaborating on new systems, database warehouses, a massive CRM conversion, and most recently, the launch of Tableau systems for fundraising analytics. And driving for us today is Sarah Chernak, our technical guru and chief Tableau architect. Today, we will be showing you one of the newest tools that we have developed for fundraising and prospecting teams. But before we get to the good stuff, it's important for you to understand just how far the museum has evolved with regards to data and data systems in just a really short period of time. The museum will be celebrating its 25th anniversary next April. This is a giant milestone, but if you think about many organizations, this is a short timeline. We are a very young institution, and yet we have a very large fundraising operation made up of 50 development staff, including 25 frontline fundraisers and 5 regional offices. And we're about to get to how much money we're expected to raise. To give you an idea of what things looked like even before this timeline in our early years, we had a very simple mom-and-pop database with extremely antiquated reports. In fact, up until 2010, most reports were done manually, transposing data by hand. Eventually, we outgrew those. And in 2010, Russ built us a data warehouse with more sophisticated reporting tools. But our fundraising team was still desperate for more. Okay, now I'm going to tell you, we may be young, but our fundraising goals are intense. In the past decade, our annual goals increased from 28 million to 60 million a year. Now you get an idea of the pressure we're under. How are we supposed to deliver these kind of numbers and operate in this data environment? So in 2012, we got permission to start exploring CRM opportunities. And after 3 years of preparing, we finally converted to a museum-wide CRM. You can see on this graph, our revenue started to spike, tripling. Was that all due to sophisticated systems? Not completely, but it definitely played a part. So now we have leverage. We have evidence.
I have a question for your CRM. What did you focus on before and what did you do?
We were not on a CRM. We were on Team Approach. And we converted to a company called Emergent based out of Boston. And it's a CRM. Okay? So now we have leverage. If you invest in us and you invest in our data systems, we can possibly raise even more money. And that's how we got to where we are today, having Tableau for dynamic reporting and data visualization. The tool that we are going to show you has to do with identifying potential donors. Our fundraisers have individual revenue goals to raise about $1 to $3 million each annually. They have portfolios of about 200 prospects, and that's rather large. So helping them to focus on key prospects is important. So when looking for good prospects, we're rating 3 pieces of information combined. We coined this rating when someone meets all 3 as the trifecta. The first part is wealth capacity. I need to have the means to give you a gift. I may love your organization and want to give you $1 billion, but guess what? I just don't have the means to do so. Fortunately, wealth capacity is quantifiable, measurable, and there are subscription sources that give us this data fairly simply. We use Wealth Engine ratings. The second piece of data that we need in our calculation is philanthropic likelihood. I may be a billionaire, but just because I am does not mean that I'm charitable. I may prefer to share my money differently, like with my friends, with my family, or not at all. Again, this data is measurable, quantifiable, and there are data sources that are going to give us this data easily. We use donor search and base it on largest gifts to other organizations. The last part of this formula is engagement. Connectivity, relationship, interest, passion, call it whatever you like, but I need to know how much you like our organization. That out of all the charities you could choose, you want to choose us. You may have heard Bill Gates and Warren Buffett say in their interviews about the Giving Pledge that philanthropists should narrow their philanthropic focus to be more impactful. Gates says he chose education and global health. He acknowledges that there are many other great causes, but they should be other philanthropists' causes. So we need to figure out who has chosen us as their cause. Meanwhile, these are non-quantifiable but extremely significant variables in assessing our trifecta rating. At the museum, we know that we have prospects with major capacity. We know that we have prospects with philanthropic likelihood. We just don't know if we have people who have chosen us as their cause. But we do assume there is some direct correlation between a donor's top cause and their engagement with that organization. So, how do we measure that? This is what then defined our problem that we set forth and used Tableau to try and solve. Okay, problem defined. Now, to outline our concept and vision, which in my opinion was to build a magical tool for our fundraisers. Imagine, we're going to tell management, i.e. the people investing in our project, we're going to build you a tool that will find all the people who have money, who are charitable, and who love the museum. And then, with your personal relationship building, Mr. Fundraiser, you're going to have no problem reaching those hefty goals that we've assigned to you. Seriously, we needed to design a tool that could quantify and rate a prospect's level of engagement with the organization, that is, measure the unmeasurable. We needed a tool to gauge prospects who already had 2 of the 3 factors, capacity and inclination, but who should be cultivated for further engagement. We needed a way to cluster types of prospects based on segmented engagement levels or similar engagement types to best craft comprehensive fundraising strategies. We're now getting to the tricky part of the problem. What kind of data do we already have that may indicate levels of engagement? We started looking at these possibilities: belonging to a donor society, volunteering with the museum, visiting the museum, being on our donors wall, participating in events, having face-to-face meetings with our staff, personally interacting in any way with our staff. These all seemed really good. I know if I heard that any person was doing any of these, I would assume that they're really engaged. Then we needed to figure out a scale. We wanted to keep it simple. Flat, non-weighted, 0 to 30, 30 being the highest, most engaged. The more activity and touch points you had with museum or staff, the higher your engagement rating. Project definition, concept, vision, done. Russ and Sarah now had to go build this thing.
All right, here you see a screenshot of our first engagement model. We looked at our database and put in the primary factors that we thought would be the most meaningful. The rating system was straight line and did not use weighting or a statistical model. We knew that this was going to be our first iteration. You know, with Tableau, we've found that one of the best things is to get something designed and put it in front of the end users so you can get some feedback and you learn some really valuable insights. On the positive side, the tool substantiated what we knew. More engaged donors give more. It was successful in identifying donors that were the most engaged, and the highest scores did equal the best known prospects. Here you can see that as the engagement goes up, so does revenue, both on cash in and on the revenue side. On the other side of the coin, I won't call these negatives, but there was several opportunities for improvement. The list was quite long. First, we had several corollary factors that overstated engagement and cash in. For example, if you gave a large gift, we would put you in one of our donor societies to thank you for that gift. If the gift was large enough, you would be placed on our donor wall. The gift would also be reflected in lifetime giving and largest gift. One gift, in theory, could have 5 times the intended impact in the model, an amplification we had not intended. We wanted this tool to be helpful to our gift officers. We quickly found that with 5 regional offices that operate quite differently, everyone had varying opinions of what engagement was most important in their operations. We needed a way to weight the factors and reflect regional variances. The current model was not predictive. It identified what we already knew. The gift amplification factor produced a wide gap between the donors we already knew and the low to mid-range donors that had significant capacity. Those are the ones we wanted to discover. The biggest drawback of this tool was it was very limited. You couldn't ask questions of the data and go through different what-if scenarios. We needed more flexibility. Taking what we learned in the first iteration, we went back to the drawing board. We took a deep dive, looking at the measurables, and reimagined how the tool would look and function. We used several statistical methods to determine how to reformulate the dashboard. Principal component analysis was used to generate new, uncorrelated variables. Our server was used to analyze determinant factors within the data set. We selected some of the most engaged donors and used logistic regression to generate a predictive score and applied the fitted score to the rest of the donors. The statistical modeling helped us design the next generation of the engagement model. We removed capability, capacity, and external philanthropic inclination from the weighting factors and added them as filters on the model. Over 30 different individual markers were incorporated into this model. They were grouped into like characteristics so that we would not have the previous problem we had with amplification. Now I'd like to walk you through the new dashboard and explain some of the terms that we exclusively use at the museum. First, you can see that we have 5 regional offices across the country. This often is the starting point for most of your questions of the data. Next, on the right, you'll see that we have household SOA. This is our way of basically saying the fundraiser that is responsible for giving entities that make up a single household. Next, we're going to look at mechanism. This is a powerful option that lets us change the y-axis in which we display against the engagement rating. All the ones that start with WE are wealth engine statistics. They provide much of the capacity and inclination that we use in this model. Annual capacity and 5-year pledge capacity are 2 of the ones that we found most useful. Donor Search is a new company that we're using for some of our analytics. The ones that start with DS are from Donor Search. Next, lifetime revenue is relatively self-explanatory, and it's probably one of the most used y-axis values. All values listed in the mechanism are also available as filters below. Next, we have filters on constituent qualities. We can filter on things such as event, meetings with staff, contacts with museums, last transaction, and age. For us, age is very important. Many of our donors are aging. The way that we interact with people from the survivor generation can be a lot different than the ones from the next subsequent generations. The next blocks of options is what really gives flexibility to this model. On the fly, we can change the way we weight these various measurements. This allows us to define the importance of these factors for the own interests, for the different regions, or for whatever questions we're asking of the data. For example, one fundraiser may feel that visiting the museum is the best indicator of engagement, but others may believe that it is interacting in relationships with staff. It can also be changed per scenario, depending on what is the most important and what we want to look at. I think we built a very flexible and powerful tool, but Lisa, Why don't you take us through some real-world scenarios of how the fundraisers and the prospect management team may use the model?
Sure. This is very encouraging. Why don't we look at our Midwest region, which is located in Chicago. This is our biggest office staff-wise, and they cover the largest territory across the country. They also have the largest fundraising event every year. Our Chicago Luncheon raises on average $5 million a year with about 2,500 people in attendance and an army of 100 or so volunteers helping to pull it all off. No joke, this operation is a machine. The fundraiser I want to look at is Jill. Jill has been with the museum since before its inception. She knows everyone and everyone knows her. Seriously, in Chicago, if you mention Jill and the museum, everybody knows who you're talking about. Needless to say, she has these relationships, and we know the old fundraising rule, people give to people. Remember I told you earlier that we had plenty of qualified prospects with capacity and philanthropy? We don't have enough fundraisers to work all of these people. So we need to find our trifectas. If we can help Jill figure out the best people for her to personally cultivate, then we have a great chance of getting some new major gift donors. Jill will want to look at the unassigned prospects, those not already working with other fundraisers. We'll want to segment it to best capacity, at least $25,000 a year annually, because that's our starting major gift level. Now we want to see people who are showing signs of interest and engagement, like coming to the Chicago Luncheon. But let's find people who have never had any personal meetings with our staff. I'm eager to see these results. Russ, what are you seeing? Any good new names for Jill?
Yeah, so while you were talking, so in this model, we don't yet have hyper driving it. So while you were talking, we went ahead and started updating some of the dashboard for this scenario. The first thing that we did is for the region. We set this to Midwest so we could pull the people back in Jill's area. Next, on fundraiser, we wanted to see the unassigned because we wanted to find people that were not currently in the fundraisers' portfolios. On the mechanism, we'll leave the lifetime revenue as the mechanism because we are discovering people that are not already significant givers. And next, on Wealth Engine, we're setting this to 25,000 capacity to limit donors that have enough capacity. It's kind of the baseline for our major giving program, so we'll set that at 25K. Over in the weighting section, we're going to set everything to 1, with the exception that we have a 3 up there for event participation, because that's one of the factors that we really want to pull out and emphasize within the model. For events, we're going to limit that to those that have been to an event last year. And then on meetings, we want people that are not already working with a fundraiser, so we're going to pick ones that don't have meeting. As you can see, one donor stands out from the rest. When you mouse over this, you see some really, all the statistics that are kind of used in the model. This looks really interesting. Let's look at some more information on this. So when that donor is highlighted, you can scroll down and you can see additional information in the grid below. Here we see this donor is a second-generation survivor, so basically a child of a survivor of the Holocaust. In capacity, you see that they have $1 million capacity. So, I mean, this is a great donor, a great potential donor. Going back to the rating, we can lasso additional prospects with significant potential and see their locations to start lining up meetings and making travel plans. So we lassoed donors. So the good news is we don't have to book any airfare. All the donors that we've identified are in local driving distance from the Chicago office. I think this will definitely get Jill started.
Well, that's very promising and good for my budget. Let's try a different one. We've heard that once you visit the museum, you are forever changed. And we also know that if you assess our prospects, the highest concentration of wealth is in New York City. We fortunately also have an office in Midtown Manhattan. A great fundraising strategy would be to find all of those prospects who have wealth capacity and philanthropic likelihood, but have not yet been to the museum. They should have some form of engagement or connection, but have never visited the museum. My plan is getting them to the museum would be the key to strengthening, furthering, and solidifying that engagement. Because again, like I said, once you visit the museum, you are forever changed. If we can find these people, they would be great ones to build a mission trip around to DC. Russ, is this something that we can use this Tableau tool to do?
Lisa, that's a great scenario. Let's see what the data shows us. First, we're going to switch over to the New York office away from the West Coast. Then next, for the fundraisers, we want to work with the people that are already in portfolios, so we're going to take unassigned out and leave all the primary fundraisers in. On wealth capacity, we're going to set that back to 0. And then on political giving, we're going to bump that one up. We found political giving is a very good indicator of philanthropic interest. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to give to us, but it does mean that they're charitable. On all the weightings, we're going to set these to 1, with the exception of museum visit. This may not be intuitive at first, but we're using the model in a creative way to answer questions that maybe wasn't first intended to. But with the flexibility here, we can do that. And you'll see the people that with the most visits are way out here on the right-hand side. For the events part, we're going to take that off. We're going to switch that back to all. And same thing with meetings for last year. We're going to set that back to all. Visiting the museum is a powerful factor that connects visitors to the museum mission. The data model reflects that those with a high museum visit rating are also some of the best donors. You see that of the people that have visited the museum and have high scores, almost universally, they're some of the highest ones on our giving scale. So next, we're going to flip the y-axis to 5-year pledge capacity. This shows top-rated prospects that have not been to the museum. So we're going to lasso an area. Now we'll lasso the donors with high capacity engagement that have not been to the museum. So we're working over on this side instead of the right, because the people on the right are the ones that have a lot of museum visits. In the detail grid, we can sort by event attendance. These donors are active in New York event attendance, have some giving capacity, and you can see some of them have significant giving capacity to make much larger gifts. A museum visit could help further the relationship with the donor and open the door to significantly larger giving. Hey, Lisa, do you think we have time for one more?
I think so, and I also think I have a good one for you. We have a fundraiser in our LA office who needs help developing prospecting strategies for the upcoming year and really wants to base them on already segmented engagement levels. Can we look at the people in the West region who have a low scored engagement, but high capacity and high philanthropic likelihood? If we can see these people, maybe we can see them in some clusters and come up with some approaches to how we may engage with them further.
Great. Let's see what we can do to help out the West Coast office. First, we'll set the region back to West Coast. Then for fundraiser, we want to limit to only prospects within the existing fundraisers pool, so we have unassigned as not checked. On mechanism, we'll go back to lifetime revenue for the y-axis. For wealth engine capacity, we'll set this to 5K. That's the annual level for our major giving mail program. On political giving, we'll set this back to 0. For the West Coast, we want to highlight donors that have had any recency activity, so we'll bump that up to 3. Recency is an interesting characteristic in the database. We looked at several factors, meetings, gifts, pretty much anything that we could measure recency on, and built it into that factor. As we look at this model, let's identify Parlour meeting host first. Several potential donors exist on the right-hand side of the model. This one definitely jumps out more. This donor has high engagement, volunteers. You can see. And one other thing, we leave all these other factors on one so that we can see in the model those other things as far as volunteerism and other forms of engagement. So we have somebody who would be a great person for the Parlour host. Next, we see the next cluster kind of over in this area of kind of the medium engaged people. These people have capacity, and we'll definitely want to invite them to the Parlour meeting. On the left is a group that is not engaged. We see a large cluster over there. We'll need a little extra push to get them involved. Let's talk with our Parlour host and the lay leaders to see if they know them, and they can extend a personal invite to help get them to the meeting. Lisa, what do you think of the West Coast segmentation?
I am very inspired by this, and I'm all ready to get on the phone with Steve and start coming up with some ideas. First, obviously, calling that person on the right and asking them to host an event at their house. So, what do you think are the next steps, aside from me using this for prospecting this year?
So going forward, we have a lot of things that we plan to kind of refine and continue to improve this tool. We just purchased Alteryx this year, and we're using that to bring in additional data from several different data sources and get that into our model. We're getting new data sources from collections, program event attendees, online ticket purchases, and several other places. We also plan to improve the model with more advanced statistical techniques and are working on tighter integration with our R server. The more the model is used, the more feedback we receive. This lets us refine and tweak the model to make it more useful. We'll also evaluate, one of the things that with the fundraisers we're looking at is evaluating the performance related to the start of year and at the end of the year engagement ratings. Will this be a predictor of the fundraiser's ability to meet their yearly revenue goals? Will increasing the engagement ratings be significant enough of a factor that we can incorporate it into the fundraiser's annual performance goals? It goes back to the old thing, what you measure is what gets improved. Check back with us this time next year, and we'll fill you in on the progress.
So that is a wrap-up of our live demo. We want to thank you for joining us this morning. And as you can see, we're very excited about the opportunities that we have to roll out the tool this year. We hope it gave you some ideas of how you may be able to build something similar for your organization. And before I ask you if you have any questions, I actually have a question. How many people in this audience actually are working for a nonprofit charitable organization? Great. And same group of hands, how many people have already used Tableau to build something similar? Great. So we're really excited. I would love to hear from you right now. Have a little bit of a dialogue, and we can learn from you as well. So any questions? We have a mic runner, so she'll run around. That's Shelby.
What program are you using to get the demographic data?
For like the capacity and those, which type ones?
For the people in their cities that they're in and their revenue and income.
So for a lot of the information, we did a big data modeling with Wealth Engine. We pulled our top 125,000 donors and sent that off to Wealth Engine. Then we brought the data back and incorporated that into our CRM. More recently, we've kind of liked some of what we found with donor search. We haven't had as many people screened with donor search yet, so we don't use it as extensively in the model, but moving forward, we're increasing our use of donor search as well. Just another reference point, and it helps kind of substantiate what we're seeing from the other demographics.
From the data, did you prove that political donations were the highest predictor, or was that what the data had the best information on?
Well, We just know from research trends through APRA and other information sources, they have already done the work to tell us that political giving is an indicator of charitable giving.
Charitable as a whole versus certain types of causes.
Absolutely, charity as a whole, but also, there's actually a study directly from APRA that has a scale. I don't have it here, but if you wanted to email me, I could get it to you. That if somebody gives $1,000 politically, they're more likely to give a 5-figure major gift to a charity. So they have found a direct correlation. I guess I didn't need that.
Are you guys using an API to get to the Wealth Engine stuff, or using their FTP upload?
We mostly use the FTP.
Okay.
I just, last week, started building out the API in Alteryx, so.
Can we talk later?
I was pretty impressed that you knew who visited and who didn't, and I was wondering if you could just talk about that for a minute, how you're able to kind of combine all that together into one place.
Do you want to talk
About the visiting?
Yeah.
Well, Shelby
Yeah,
can talk to it.
It's two parts. One, we know who requested VIP visits. Donors who request VIP visits are in the CRM. We have that data. We haven't yet connected our e-ticks to our CRM. It is also part of the Alteryx map to get into the museum. So we know that our major giving donors are, connected enough that they requested and they come, but it's an incomplete statistical point. And more than likely, they come in and go all the time. And they request it all the time. And in the next year, we will have a much better idea of how often and how much they come. And we've got 10 years of that data just waiting.
But you bring up a very good point too, though, because it's always a chicken and egg type thing. Like, we would love for our data to be better. There's things that we've been trying to track, but we know we only have a percentage of what actually occurs. Even fundraisers meetings, we want them to get that in the system, but not all of them are there.
Yeah.
So it's certainly a work in progress, and the more that we have these tools that really highlight and provide use back to the people, the more abilities we'll have to get data back into the system.
Right, and the meeting statistic is only meetings with our fundraisers. We have 400 other employees that have meetings with those same people all the time, and that's not in there. That's also in the roadmap.
But it will be.
But it will
We're
be.
moving in that direction.
That's my job.
Hi, I was wondering, just in terms of the setup, the time and resources it took you guys to, especially set up that first model and then move into the more complex model, like project budget or just how much time. I assume both of you were working on it, but was it full time or?
Definitely not full time. Sarah, you want to?
The first model didn't take all that long. I mean, I'm very familiar with the data. I've been working with you guys for 7 years, so it didn't take me a while to just put that up there. I think iterating it, I'd say we worked on it for
A few months.
Yeah, but definitely not full time. It was probably a few hours a week, and then in the last push, it was a little more than that.
And I actually liked the first model, but they told me, no, this isn't good enough. So it's not significant. It's really not what you need. But I was like, but it looks good. It's doing it. And they said no. They weren't allowing me to use it.
And I will say, Lisa wakes up in the middle of the night with concepts. And
I do. I emailed
them
them the next morning. I was like, I've got a great new idea. So.
Hi, I also work in prospect management, and one issue we sometimes have with fundraisers is that they have their own ideas about what a good prospect is. So I wondered if you'd rolled this tool out to the fundraisers, and if so, how that's gone.
So I feel your pain, and I absolutely know that one of the biggest challenges is getting the fundraisers to believe you, that you know what you're talking about. I've been working with my team for 13 years now, so we have a little bit of validation with them, but it's definitely a culture change. I have to prove, look, I showed you, the data is proving you're not getting what you need from the prospect list that you want to keep. So why don't you try, some of the people that I've given you. Basically, we're kind of in a transition where I'd say about 2 years ago, I let them keep some of their own people, and I force-fed, for lack of better words, onto them the qualified people that we found. And now we're moving into, I'd say by this year, we're closer to maybe an 80% qualified portfolio, and we let them keep about 20% of the people that they wanted to keep. And throughout the year, we remind them, here are the people that you wanted. Why do you want them? They're not delivering. Nothing is happening. Can we start to drop them? So it's absolutely been a culture shift. And if you don't have the management above you backing you up, then it's even worse. But we're definitely getting there.
And we also go out to the regions twice a year to reinforce it so that they can't get away from us or ignore us when we're on conference calls.
Yeah.
So I think, speaking of culture shift, so what was it like getting people to actually use Tableau? So you, like you said, force-fed them the names, but then actually getting them to get into Tableau and utilize it.
Well, Tableau, actually, it was like, this bright colored candy. All of a sudden, in fact, when we first got it, we didn't buy a ton of licenses. We bought a few licenses. And then as soon as we started to showcase to some of the fundraisers, look what we can do, then it became, well, I want to do that. And especially with the mapping, I would say the mapping was the first and foremost tool that they wanted to be able to use. It became, one of the things that we always had a challenge was, we have traveling exhibitions that are going around the country, and so our regional offices will try to leverage those traveling exhibitions by throwing in some type of fundraising meeting beforehand. But they need to say to us, we need to find out who the donors are in that section, who the prospects are, who are the best people that we can contact to anchor, some type of an event around. And in the olden days, we were doing this, with zip code sorts and all of that. And now, the Tableau magic tool, they were there, dragging and opening up and looking at all the, the dots and finding out who they were and getting very excited. So I would say probably the mapping was the first thing. And then once they had that, we had to invest in more licenses.
It really helped empower them too, though, because before they would have to send in a list request, they'd pull the zip codes that they wanted. It would come over to our team, and then it would take us, we had a lot of other things on our plate too, so it might take a week to get it back to them. Lots of times they had deadlines coming up that they had printers for invite lists and other things. And they weren't always the most thinking ahead of, hey, I need this list with enough time to get this up to the printer. So Tableau was wonderful for them. It empowered them. They would go onto it. They would put in their parameters. They would get the exact quantity they wanted, and they didn't have to come to our group and wait for a week to get the data back.
And it also gave them the power of data. Some of our special event managers didn't like us because they would be like, why do you want to have an event in Silicon Valley? And you don't have any people there. And so our West Coast major gift officer would be like, look at all these people with capacity now. We'd come with a list and be like, I have 100 people that are worth my time and yours.
Hi, you mentioned mapping, and I was curious if you usually go by the zip code or by the city. Because I've had problems in the past trying to use cities since they don't always get recognized. And when you're looking at like a portfolio of someone's prospects, you cannot lose people. So I'm wondering how you deal with that.
For most of the things we use zip code. We've played with cities and counties and tried some other things within Tableau. Mostly because of the quality of our data in the system. There's also not real good validation on even the spelling of cities within our CRM. So we had way too many problems with cities when we tried to use that.
Okay, thank you.
We've got a prospect manager that wants us to use census data, though. He's like, it's going to work better.
That is one of the things that we're looking at, is breaking down, especially for wealth capacity, because some of the areas, where the wealth is centered in real estate is much smaller than a zip code. So we are looking at some of the census data and getting down to the lot level of whether we can use that for determination of how good of a prospect somebody might be. That's kind of one of the works in progress, but we're getting closer.
I was curious, how did you build the logistic regression model? Was that done in R and then like integrated into Tableau, or was that like calculated fields?
So on that one, we have somebody who's not here right now who did that work. That was built in R, and then we used, he ran a bunch of different scenarios through on R, and then we don't, as it is right now, we don't have direct integration of that data with our CRM or with Tableau. We have been exploring hooking the two servers together so that we can do direct calls. So that's kind of why it was on one of our things for more integration next year.
When you implemented your new CRM solution, did you convert 100% of the historic data, even though it was from a poor data source? And did that play into the modeling for lapsed donors and things of that nature?
We spent, easily we spent more than 2 years.
Yeah.
I would say we spent a solid 3 years doing data cleanup, data mapping. This is how we want it to be sorted in the new system. This is how we want it to be coded in the new system. So we spent a solid 3 years round the clock doing some hefty data cleanup, because garbage in, garbage out, we were not going to be moving to a new system, under the same situation. So they allotted us the time to invest into that massive data cleanup.
Yeah, so it definitely was pretty close to 100%. As we went through, we found some things that we didn't even know what they meant anymore, so they were of no use.
Yeah.
So we dropped some
We
of that
archived
stuff.
a lot.
But like transactions, interactions, all those things, anything that we thought would have value, we brought over. Even some things we weren't sure, we brought over and flagged it so we could still run analytics off of it later.
And then the stuff that, like we said, we couldn't figure out, they may have had coding from a previous conversion. They did a conversion in 1999 from Fundmaster to Team Approach, and some of that coding made absolutely no sense. So we put a lot on an archived file, so if we have to ever go and look for something, we have it, but we were like, we don't need to put this in the system.
And from a staffing standpoint, it was really hard, but I will say we didn't lose one staff member through it, and there was hundreds of extra hours, but I think it was just an investment in the goal of getting it done so that we could do these major amazing things that we wanted to do with the data.
And they had us do it during our 20th anniversary, so it surprisingly didn't kill anybody.
I'll share one solution maybe you could consider for mapping issues. Is there anybody here from Texas A&M? No. They have a fantastic geocoding database. I uploaded all of our database to Texas A&M. I love it because when you get a reply, it says, "Howdy, partner." And it comes back with really 8 or 10 digits of longitude and latitude. It completely eliminates all the issues with city and so forth. So it's very, very good and very inexpensive. So my question is, I'm really intrigued by your engagement scores. How did you tease those out? Why did you pick those things, and how did you do that?
Basically, we started by looking at what kind of data we actually had, and of the data that we had, what could mean engagement with the museum. So basically, we know now we have a lot of other things that we could get. It's just getting other areas of the museum on board to say, yes, we will collect your data this way. Just like Shelby was saying, we have program staff who have meetings. We need to get that in the system. We have so many people who are giving their Holocaust collections to the museum. Can you imagine if we could now combine the collections database with this? Because donating your family's, heirlooms is a huge, connector. So we know we have a lot more to collect, but basically what we did was we looked at what do we already have, and that's actually, what Russ was referring to is some of the stuff that automatically we're like, oh, this connects them, they're on the donor wall. But then it became counterintuitive because, yes, in order to get on the donor wall, they already had to have given you a big gift. So when we looked at those results, it was like, oh, we know all these people already. So that's why we had to change it up a bit.
We have 91 data silos yet to be incorporated, prioritized and ready to go, and 15 of them are
when we converted
hefty.
to the CRM, basically phase one was roll it out to the people who absolutely need it, which are your fundraisers and your development services team, your membership team, and now we are in phase two, where it's being rolled out to our program officers who assist in fundraising.
Question, have you guys considered the use of personas under the data? Because I noticed you've got all the variables on there for engagement, and each one is individual. Have you considered about natural segmentation of these things into actual personas so that if you wanted to do an event around people with like engagement variables or an event with people around like engagement variables?
That's a great idea. That sounds like something to put on your to-do list.
I'll say we have been talking about that for our list management and developing that idea. It's very, very much, like we started talking about it like a month
No, but I like that.
Yeah. Talk about it. I think we had trouble articulating why it was necessary.
And it also will help for the end user saying, I want this scenario versus this scenario. It's talking to them in their language.
Quick question, what is your CRM?
Oh, our CRM is called Emergent Portfolio. It is a small company up in Boston. And again, we're kind of where we're at because in 2012 is when we started looking at all of the RFPs. It took literally 2 years. We're part government, so you can imagine the procurement process that we have to go through. It took about 2 years to look at demos, to go through with all of the staff that were going to fund this and had, vested interests, and then to get everybody's opinion and buy-in into where they were willing to go. I can preface this by saying that 3 years prior, we were doing a conversion and we were an organization's beta test and it backfired. And so in 2012, we were very gun shy. So I'm not sure we took the leap, as far as we would have liked to have gone at that point, but that's where we are today. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, we also have a very large, for a museum of our size, we have about 150,000 people in our membership program that does some pretty sophisticated things. So we need a CRM that really could support that level of a membership program. So that also kind of skewed us away from some of the decision that, like our major gift side, there were some other options that might have been a little bit more friendly for the fundraisers. So that was certainly a large factor in our determination going with portfolio.
So when you're going after not necessarily the big donors, the $1 million donors, but rather the sort of could potentially become those big donors, and you're trying to figure out who has that affinity, who could potentially become a big donor. So they haven't been as charitable as the others. What does that sort of list look like of activities that don't show that they're not engaged, but they're not super engaged either? And how do you really work out that model to figure out how to push them over the edge to that big donor?
So one of the ways that we can use this is we didn't, and in the scenarios that we used, we didn't do any that filtered on already giving to us, but we could use that in one of the models and say, okay, you're already giving to us something, your capacity is here, so we can see that there's a big gap between what you are giving us and what you could be giving us. And then, however we want to look at the different types of engagement factors, it really depends on the case scenario which engagement factors we want to study, because it kind of also depends on, you know, what is the strategy that we're thinking of implementing with this segmented group. But I can tell you for portfolio assignment, because I do the portfolio assignment for the 25 fundraisers that we have, and it's a matter of going through their previous assignments, who performed, who didn't perform, who performed to the best of their capacity and who did not, and also, said fundraiser, how much work did you do with them, and how much movement did you get? So there's a lot of assessment and analysis, but I would think that in bringing in the new people, it's that trifecta rating of, you know, the other thing that we, with our portfolio assignments, we have enough, that's what I keep saying, we have so many donors to the museum. We don't have a lack of donors, and we don't have a lack of people who have capacity. We just don't have the relationships that we need to have. And we don't have enough fundraisers to be able to be personally building these relationships, thus this tool to help narrow the focus.
So when you guys were first talking, you were saying that it's very difficult to tell, like, what is their top cause, and are you guys part of that? And also kind of building on the personas, how are you guys going about approaching that kind of mindset of your donors and figuring out what's important to them, especially kind of with the intergenerational type of stuff that you're talking about, like the survivor generation and their children, to ensure that the things that are important to them that cause them to donate also get passed down to their children, so that way it's a legacy type of thing.
Well, second generation, I have to tell you, you would think is an automatic engagement. It's actually not. Second generation just happens to be a factor. If second generation is also giving and coming to things, then that second generation label exponentially weights the other engagement pieces. So sometimes somebody's a second gen and they have no interest at all. That was their parents' cause. Sometimes the second gen, it's magnified. It magnifies all the other stuff that they're doing. So you kind of have to look at it as an overlay to weight that. Any other questions? Oh. That would be something we have talked to our social engagement person. We have a very strong social media program on Twitter feeds, on Instagram, on Facebook pages. Each of our regional offices has Facebook pages. We just have to figure out what we are allowed and not allowed to use in terms of getting the personal data off of this. But I keep thinking, gosh, if somebody is sharing all of our news feeds, that's a huge level of engagement. It's just being able to get the information on the back end and get it in here.
And from an administrative standpoint, we have to get everybody to agree what our baseline required fields are and how you put them up and collect them. That's always a joy when you get back, city, state, and zip in the same field.
Yeah, but we completely agree that activity on social media is an indicator of engagement.
So it just occurred to me that there are a lot of opportunities to kind of dig into the data here, and we're at a conference with a bunch of nerds. Do you guys have a strategy to reach out to get support from people who'd want to volunteer their techniques and stuff?
I guess give Shelby your card.
We're also going to use it as an engagement tool for our other staff members because we have those 91 different subsets of data. So we're going to invite some of our program staff that is leery of giving us their 2,000 person database for Committee on Prevention of Genocide because they're like, don't solicit them. I'm like, I will make sure we're not going to ask them for money. But so we're thinking about inviting them like for a 3-hour, we have this data set. We're going to have the staff members to answer questions and just share the data set in our museum because our technical security guys are really crazy. So we'll set up the computer, we'll set up the Tableau dashboards, here's your data, ask questions of the program staff to get them invested and have fun, and we're gonna feed them. So that's our latest brainstorm, and probably our biggest aha moment that I have to sell to my boss, the CIO.
On that same note, I think as soon as we get more of the program areas, like people actually doing like Holocaust education, that'll be data we can actually make public. Right now, pretty much everything is fundraising, so it's hard to like bring the community in, but genocide prevention and Holocaust education, that stuff we can bring to the DC community. So I'm excited about that eventually.
Yeah.
And at the same time, when we're doing anything with statistical analysis for strategic planning or anything else, people are scared that you're going to assess their program that they've been doing for 25 years and find that it's not as successful as you thought it was. You just love it a whole lot. So there's that fear as well. So, we're at the point where we've ripped off the Band-Aid and forced it on everybody that we can. Now we have to start romancing the rest.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, if you think of any, our names are on the screen. Otherwise,
And I also want to say, if anybody is a DC nonprofit, I'm trying to start a Tableau nonprofit user group, so please email me or come talk to me. I would love to talk. Thank you.
And thank you.
Thanks, everybody.